So back in October of 2021, somebody started filing several complaints against my license.
Let's pause it right here for just a second. This guy on the left is in charge of the entire organization. He's like the CEO. His title is Chief Appraiser, and his name is Jeff Law. This guy on the right is the number 2 person in charge in the organization. He's the man that's bold enough to actually sign these complaints. He's the director of residential appraisals for the entire county, and his name is Randy Armstrong.
And the complaints allege all sorts of things. And I just want to say first, just to make it very clear, because I'm going to entertain a different viewpoint here in a minute. I just want to make it very clear. What's in the complaint is absolutely baseless. It is. I'm trying to measure my words. I'm just going to tell you what I think. It's crazy. It's highly emotional. It's crazy, and it demonstrates in the complaints. If you just read the complaints, that I'm absolutely innocent of everything being accused. In the facts, all you have to do is read it. Now, beyond that, I just want to say this. When I first got the complaint, I thought it was bogus because it was so crazy. It was obvious that whoever wrote it didn't really know the property tax code. It was highly emotional. There were just wild accusations all over the place, and I didn't know whether to take it serious or not. So I'm going to hit pause right there because I think that the reason why this matters of concern to you guys is because of who filed the complaint. There's a real question as to who filed that complaint. Was it the Tarrant Appraisal District? Was it somebody? Was it Randy Armstrong? How much does Jeff Law support this complaint? Those are questions that I feel like are a matter that you guys might want to know about, and I've got plenty of documentation here. I can provide a lot of details on this. I'm happy to cooperate fully. I talked to my attorney about speaking here today. I said, hey, do you feel like you need to come and speak on my behalf or whatever? And he said, you know what, this is more than anything, there's a free speech issue at hand, and you guys need to talk. He said, if there's something that crosses a couple of lines, then you might not answer the questions or bring the questions in. But I'm here with the whatever. I don't want to say permission, but understanding the attorney. All right. So here's what I have to say about this. We're gonna make these during public comments because I'm not sure these will be allowed during the discussion later. You guys are leaders, and I assume that you're here because you want to make a difference. The only thing that I can imagine would stand in your way of standing up to do what's right is the question that you might have on whether or not there's something in that complaint that shows that I'm guilty of something. And here's what I want to say. Regardless if I'm guilty or if I'm innocent, we have a problem. Let me explain. If I'm guilty, then what's happened is I've been protesting over the last 5 years, filed over 60,000 protests. There's an army of people in this building that have participated in helping me resolve the protests, hear the protests, people in the ARB, all over the place. There wasn't a complaint filed until October. If I'm guilty in this, there are an army of people in here that are guilty as well. And there's a big problem if somebody didn't speak up until this complaint was filed. So if I'm guilty, we have a problem, and I believe it's of concern to the board. If I'm innocent, then what that means is we have a big problem. And the only question that I have, if I'm innocent, is what is the Tarrant Appraisal District okay with? Are they okay with the fact that somebody filed that complaint knowingly? Or did Mr. Law know that this complaint was filed? Is he okay with it being filed? What's been done to show who's filing this complaint? I've got a lot of details. Can't get into it right now. I've got a lot of questions. What's okay? How many other people are have complaints been filed on like this?
Mr. Krantz, your time is almost done.
Yeah, there's valuable seconds here. Have you seen the complaint? Who's seen the complaint? Is it common for employees of the appraisal district to file a complaint against the public, or do those complaints always represent the appraisal district? Do you have any policy regarding employees filing complaints using county assets, county resources in order to do so? How do you feel about the fact that there are a lot of questions there. I'm going to pause right there. I've got so much to say, so much I'd love to cooperate on, and I will sit down now. Thank you.
All right.
You just finished watching the public comments portion of the Tarrant Appraisal District Board of Directors meeting. During that portion, I was free to say just about anything I wanted, but they weren't allowed to comment or ask questions back at what I was saying. So I made sure to let them know I had a lot more information, and I specifically mentioned that the complaints implicated Jeff Law and the Tarrant Appraisal District as a whole, because I knew if I didn't make sure that they knew I had a lot more information and it went to that level of implication, that they were going to try and sweep it under the rug. So I left them hanging there. I needed to make it undeniable. And so here's what happens. Next, they go through a few more agenda items, and then they finally get to agenda item 7B, which specifically addresses a letter that my attorney sent to them back before the May 12th board meeting. Okay. Now, there was another meeting where they all got together on May 27th. They did not address this issue. But thanks to the heroic acts of Rich Diot, he is a board member there, he was able to get it on the agenda. And now let's listen in to how they handled this issue. But first, I want to set the stage really quick. At this point, everybody in the room admits they haven't seen the letter. They don't know what's in the letter. And so what could they be talking about for a solid 10 minutes without having any information whatsoever? Let's check it out. I'll give you a hint. After that 10 minutes, this whole meeting gets flipped on its head. Let's hear how it goes.
I think the board has some discussion, and I have checked with our attorney, and I would like to suggest for the board's discussion that there is also a problem with, or not necessarily a problem, but it also involves one of our employees. So I would like to suggest that we put it on for the next meeting under executive session, personnel issues. Mr. Tapper, would you like to?
I think if it is a personnel issue, so I think it definitely can qualify to go into executive session. So if that is how the board would like to discuss it, I think that would be an appropriate thing to do.
Discussion?
Would I be invited to that meeting? Since it involved me?
So typically, the rule on executive session is people who have to come into executive session is obviously everybody who is a member of the board, and then anybody else that the board deems as being necessary for the discussion. If it's a personnel matter and it has to do with an employee of the appraisal district, that particular employee also has a right to come into executive session, but anybody else that will come into executive session would end up being somebody that the board invited in. I would also suggest that if we are going to put this on for executive session, that we should probably post it not just for personnel, but also for anticipated litigation, because I did hear in the public comment that he's contemplated litigation against the appraisal district.
Where did that comment come from? Who said that?
Under threat of litigation, they could just seal this whole thing up and shut it down and never see the light of day. Go back and listen to the tape. Was there any threat of litigation?
So we need to seek legal.
I would post it. I think I would post it that way.
Okay. That's just advice from our attorney.
So let me make sure I understand. It can go to litigation because it involves an employee. I'm sorry, executive session. And as Mr. Crouch, he's the subject of all of this, going to be invited to the executive session or not.
And now you know who the good guy is. This man's name is Rich Diot.
So, and that is up to the board as to whether you want to have him in there or not. If you do, and you can have him in there for part of it and not for all of it. The rule on who gets to come to executive session is any member of the board obviously gets to be in there. If it's under personnel, the employee that it is about gets to come in, and then the board can invite in other people who are necessary for the discussion.
Any comment?
I may have a question for legal then, and I guess it would be a legal question for our attorney.
You threaten litigation.
I think I was still asking, I
sorry,
have a
I'm
question.
Sorry, this is the board
And I-
discussion,
Okay.
okay?
Yeah, I think I have a legal question, and I could ask it, I think, I'm not certain whether, is this and you could probably tell us in this, because I'm not trying to hide my question, is this a discussion about an employee, or is this an action by someone who happens to be an employee and they did it on their personal time? And I do not know.
And I don't know the answer to that
Okay.
question.
That would be
Okay.
And that may be part of the
And
discussion.
I think only that individual would be able to, and I don't know if Jeff knows, I don't know if anyone knows, so I don't know that answer.
I think that we,
The next meeting is 2 months away.
yeah, it is.
And, I'm not sure that a private conversation between the two individuals, might not be appropriate as well. And we won't have to discuss this then. Or is it genuinely a cat issue?
That's what I think we need to discuss.
I mean, I think as of right now, it is unclear, and I think that's to Ms. Burgess's comment, as to whether this is a TAD issue.
But
or not.
it does,
An
this is a board discussion, excuse me, Mr. Chandler.
My name was on the agenda, I'm just raising my hand. I'm
Okay,
politely
good.
raising my hand.
Okay, thank you.
And my name was on the agenda.
I think it's appropriate for Mr. Chandler to be able to ask a question here and there. This is the board discussion we're having now.
Yes, it is. And when you start adding in all the, the public comment, didn't we just get into a big, I think it's a different issue. But anyway,
So just to understand, there was a complaint against Mr. Crouch sent into a licensing board. That's got nothing to do with us, right? That's got nothing to do with us.
possibly.
It maybe was one of our employees, I don't know that, but there's a chance that maybe it was a TAD employee that filed that complaint. And I guess we need to discuss whether that involves us or not, because if they did it on their own time, that may be something then different than if they did it here or so. I guess that's a personnel
It's a
discussion,
personnel decision.
but the discussion then is gonna be whether that employee had a right to do something like that. It still doesn't have anything to do with the complaint that was filed against him. I don't know that, why do we have
haven't
to get
seen the
involved in that complaint?
That's the point. We have not seen the complaint. We have not seen how it was signed, who signed it, or who did it, are we
Yeah.
involved in it? Those are things that are questions that I would like to do, that it could be done in executive session, and there may be more to it. I mean, I haven't seen the complaint. No one, as far as I know, no one up here has seen it.
I've not seen
And
it.
so we don't really
I've
know
not
those
seen it.
questions, and that is what can be discussed in executive session. We could probably even, today, could we call an executive session? I guess not. No, we can't, it's not on the
I think
agenda.
this is
No,
posted
it's not.
properly
Okay,
to go
it has
ahead
to
and
be
have an
posted.
executive session on that.
But I think there are some.
Sorry, is that a yes or no?
No, that was a no, I don't think it was posted properly.
No, we can't.
Executive
I
session.
agree with that. I have a question for Mr. Chandler though, and I'm wondering, there's nothing prohibiting because he's speaking on the agenda item.
Can I ask one more question of the attorney before you talk to Mr. Crouch?
Yeah.
So I've been in a lot of executive sessions in a prior board. We've never had somebody from the outside come and talk to us, even when it was an employee. It was an executive session, and then we went out and there was a session with the employee, and they could choose to whether they did it open or closed session there. In general, they did it closed because we're talking about personnel matters. So my question is, if Mr. Crouch has an attorney, if we were to invite him, would be up to us whether we invite him with his attorney or him without the attorney, and he would just have to come in the way that we invited him.
Yeah, that is correct, for executive session. And there'd have to be, it's not just completely the unbridled discretion of the board. There would have to be a reason tied to why we were going into executive session that legitimizes that person being in there, yes.
But I think what we're saying is our reason to go into executive session is going to be pretty much just a personnel matter. Does the complaint involve somebody that works for TAD? And if it doesn't, then I feel like we don't have a lot to discuss at that point. But if it does, then we're looking at, is that within the policy that's acceptable for them to do as an employee of TAD?
No, you're right. Okay. And I think the point that is obviously there's been apparently a complaint that was filed against Mr. Crouch with the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulations. The Texas Department of Licensing and Regulations will deal with that complaint as they think is appropriate. That is what their job is to do. Certainly the Tarrant Appraisal District did not file that complaint. Nobody at this board, my understanding is Mr. Law, that nobody that had the authority of the appraisal district to file the complaint did it. So really, in a sense, the complaint doesn't have anything to do with the board. And so I think what maybe I've heard some of the members say, what they want to know is, does the complaint have something to do with an employee? And maybe if it does, was it the employee acting within the course and scope of their employment, or was it somebody who happens to work at the appraisal district who was just acting as a private citizen, exercising their rights for that? And I think some of those are things that some of the board members have indicated we don't know the answer to. I can tell you I sure don't know the answer to any of those questions.
So let me get this straight. You know that it wasn't filed by anybody at the appraisal district. Nobody had authorization to file that. It wasn't filed by the appraisal district itself or Jeff Law, but we haven't had any conversation about this and nobody's seen it? And then you say you don't have the answers to any of those questions, but you actually just made a bunch of statements. Those weren't questions. You're telling me that you know a bunch of stuff, but then you don't know.
Okay.
Is it our responsibility to take action on personnel items as a board, or does it go to the chief appraiser first and then go through that course prior, or does it?
No.
I've never dealt with personnel items on other boards before it went through the CEO or whoever of the board, or the city manager, whomever it was. They dealt with personnel matters until it got to a legal action.
No, and that is right. I mean, at the end of the day, Mr. Law is the chief appraiser. Mr. Law is responsible for managing and overseeing the employees of the appraisal district. This board manages and oversees Mr. Law. And so if this board was going to take some sort of action against an individual employee of the appraisal district, you would probably get some advice from me that told you that you were stepping outside of your lane, and that was not proper for you to do that. However, you do manage the chief appraiser. And so if what you want is you would like for the chief appraiser to come and explain to you things that are happening in the appraisal district and how he is handling it and dealing with it, I think it is appropriate to have him give you that type of explanation and answer any questions that y'all have. At the end of the day, any action that's taken though against an individual employee of this district, if there is any, it's going to be something that Mr. Law
That's Mr. Law. Okay, I think the thing that I was trying to say is that in the executive session, we would discuss whether TAD appraisal district was involved. What involvement do we have? Because we haven't seen it. There may be some things we don't know. And in an executive session that we could talk about, if there is an employee of TAD that did this the complaint about, okay, send it into the licensing board. How does that involve the board? And there may be some connection, and if so, that's what I think we need to know. I'm not talking about any, Mr. Law does, he's in charge of all the employees, that's his job, not ours, we know that. So, but that's not my question, or my concern. Yes, sir.
So may I just suggest that rather than say we are having an executive session because we don't know if we need one for this, at this point, can we direct the chief appraiser to investigate this matter and report it to us? And then, within a reasonable amount of time, so Mr. Crouch has an answer to his question, and so that we truly address this issue, research it, figure out, does it have anything to do with us, and then make a recommendation to our chair. Yes, there is this matter is going to involve an employee, or no, this matter is between Mr. Crouch and the licensing department, and it really has nothing to do with us. We're going to discuss it. Let him know what you find out, and that's it. I mean, I think let him look into it, because I don't know anything about it. I don't know if it is a personal issue or not at this point.
If I could clarify a few things with Mr. Crouch. Was it a complaint or a series of complaints?
Series of complaints.
Do you know how many?
Give me just 1 second.
Order of magnitude, 5?
1, 2, 3, 4 that I know of. May I add, I got an email on July, I got an email on November 9th, 2021 from the TDLR investigator. When I asked him who filed the complaint, his response was, I quote, "Mr. Crouch, the complaint was filed by the Tarrant Appraisal District." So what he said, he's saying he was making assertions about who filed this complaint, but based on what evidence? I've come here today because my name was on the agenda, and I've got plenty of documentation to show Mr. Law's involvement and the involvement of the Tarrant Appraisal District far beyond whether or not there's an employee issue. I think that is certainly a concern, but I understand the responsibilities of the board, and I plan to stay focused on this.
Were the complaints signed by the individual making them?
Yes,
And is that, so there's a name on it?
there is a name,
And what is that name?
Randy Armstrong.
Was there a title on it?
Yes.
What was that?
Give me a second, I can show you if you'd like.
Wait, no.
No, I read it.
Let me just,
You can just read it.
okay, well, I've got to get it out real quick.
While he's doing that, another question to the attorney, is this setting up a precedent for all actions for staff to be brought to this board? So every single staff action is going to be brought to us in the future, and so we're going to be taking action on every staff item instead of it going to the chief appraiser.
No, that's not what we're talking about.
And
we're not
I don't know what
presuming to do that.
Yeah.
We are looking at how was this case done, and who signed it, and in what authority. And
I'm just wondering, is Jeff Law's name on this? And okay.
It's not.
I can give you an email with Jeff Law's name on it. And I can give you an open records request showing that nobody filed an open records request to get this information publicly. So that implicates to me that they're infringing.
Okay. So,
And I can show a whole bunch of
if
inaction.
I can just finish my few questions here. At this point, Randy Armstrong appears to have filed, looks like four complaints. And what is the nature of the complaints? Or is that?
I'm sorry. It was a question directed to me.
Yeah.
That's a question that I can certainly answer. I would be a little bit concerned if the appraisal district didn't know the answer to that question. So I would be curious to know, do you know the nature of the complaints?
I do not.
Okay.
I have not seen the complaints. This is the first time that I've actually seen a portion of the complaint.
he hasn't even seen a portion of the complaint.
Okay, so, and I'm looking at one of the complaints that says Randall C. Armstrong is the name company, is Tarrant Cat. So, that answers some of the questions.
That's what I was trying to get at, that there is a possibility that the appraisal district is involved in this, and, yeah,
What
that may.
I would suggest, and Matthew, if you listen carefully to what I'm saying, so I don't want to cross any lines here, and advise me if I'm getting outside. We got 2 months till the next meeting. Mr. Pompa suggested that Jeff Law do an investigation. I think probably ought to be person involved with that. Find out what happened, and maybe Chandler and Randy can get together and work this out.
I don't think you've said anything that is improper to talk under this agenda item. The only thing I would point out is that the way your agenda is set up, under number 6 you have action items. Under number 7 you have discussion items. And this particular item is listed as a discussion item. And so, you, Mr. Pompa, you've certainly expressed your individual desires of what you'd like the chief appraiser to do. Unfortunately, I don't think the way it's posted, you all could take a vote and say, we're gonna instruct the chief appraiser to investigate it.
But we can talk, right? And
Yes.
suggestions can be made that aren't voted on that might.
Right, that is correct.
Okay.
Well, what about the issue of the executive session for the next board meeting? Do we just wait? Or do we wait during this 2 months, and maybe it would be posted later? If we could decide later?
Exactly.
Can
So
we do that?
the policy that y'all just passed earlier today had in it some detailed provisions as to how you put something on an agenda.
I read that.
And you have the right to put it on the agenda.
Okay.
And so if what you wanted to do was have you as the board chair visit with Mr. Law when it comes time to set up the next agenda, if he has learned more about the circumstances behind it between now and then, and you think that it is an appropriate item to put on for executive session at that point in time,
Okay.
under those policies, you can go ahead and put that on.
I think
Chair,
that's
have
it.
a question for the
Okay.
chief appraiser too. Also, Chandler, you had your hand up. Is there something else you
Yeah.
wanted to add?
Yes, I just wanted to cover real quick what I handed to you, because you asked a question, I gave you some documentation, but I didn't really explain what you got.
Okay,
So,
briefly, if you can, I think we're going to be talking about this possibly the next meeting.
you got it. Well, we've got the packet that has several more papers. It shows very clearly that if you just turn to the very back page, you can see this is an envelope that the complaint was mailed in. You got a tracking number up here. The tracking number is listed in the body of one of the complaints. It's no doubt the envelope that carried the complaint. And in the top left corner, the return address is listed as the Tarrant Appraisal District with the Tarrant Appraisal District address. And so I've omitted all the other details of the complaint to just focus on who filed the complaint. The next thing that I want to mention is the single sheet of paper that I handed out was an email that as soon as I got that email from the investigator saying that this was filed under the Tarrant County Appraisal, by the Tarrant Appraisal District, I was in complete disbelief because the complaint appears bogus. It's so crazy. And so I've enjoyed a good relationship with Mr. Law, so I thought, I'm just gonna email and say, hey, you know about this complaint? He replies back and says, no, he doesn't. And I believed him on November 10th of 2021. The reason why I gave you this email is because on November 10th of 2021, he was made aware of the fact that a complaint was filed against me, appearing to be the Tarrant Appraisal District, and if I was in charge of an organization, I might ask around the offices and just say, hey, does anybody know anything about this complaint? And I've given it plenty of time and remained very silent for many, many months. To me, the lack of action on this implicates the Tarrant Appraisal District. And we might want to say that the actions were taken separately, but there's been nothing happened to separate the complaint from the Tarrant Appraisal District. It's Tarrant Appraisal District information all over these pages, and there's no separation that's happened. So to me, the lack of action shows that there's some amount of, if you see something wrong that's happened, you do nothing about it. What does that say about how much you agree or disagree with it? So for that reason, I believe that we have a discussion about Mr. Law and the Tarrant Appraisal District as a whole, not just Mr. Armstrong.
Madam Chair, thank you for that platitude. And I want to ask the Chief Appraiser, Jeff, if
If the route of you doing an investigation, if there's anything about that you cannot do, or, obviously I have to step carefully in the situation, but you get to the bottom of it.
I would like, yeah, I'd be happy to try to get to the bottom of it. When
You
I
could also address the email.
Yeah, when Mr. Crouch sent me the email back on November the 10th, I was 100% honest in my response that no, the Tarrant Appraisal District did not file any kind of complaint against you. I was unaware of any complaint filed against you, and I had not ever seen any of the complaints filed against you. I did ask around after the fact about a complaint, and I did learn about a complaint that had been filed. And it was Mr. Armstrong that had filed the complaint. It was my understanding at that particular time that Mr. Armstrong had filed the complaint solely on his own as an individual. It wasn't until, I guess, the public information request that we started getting in not long ago that I discovered that actually, as you pointed out, that the envelope was signed, had at our address. That was the first that I knew anything about that. It was also the first time that I had learned when the public information requests were being made and the data, the information, the packets started coming to us, that it was actually signed, Randall Armstrong, Director of Residential Appraisal. That was the first time that I had learned anything about that. I did not direct Mr. Armstrong to file a complaint against you. That was something that was a choice that he had made all on his own. But I don't think that the Tarrant Appraisal District should be implicated in this, because it was action, I think, that he had taken, not us as an entity. And again, I will say from here forward, I never directed him to go file a complaint against you. I agree. I think we've had a good relationship, and I won't want us to maintain that relationship.
It's my hope. So when did you find out?
About the complaint? Well, it was after you sent this email.
Okay. And it's been quite some time.
Oh boy. If you remember at the first part of this video, Mr. Law said that he hadn't seen the complaint. He hadn't even seen a portion of the complaint. And now he admits that he found out about the complaint in November 2021. He found out it was Randy Armstrong, but he didn't even read it. He didn't ask to see it. He didn't want to know what was in it. What if I was doing something wrong? Shouldn't he get involved a little bit? He knows I represent over 20,000 people. That's a pretty significant thing. I wonder if he knew what was in that complaint. But he did say later on that he did see the complaint. And he did see that it was even signed by Randy Armstrong in the name of the appraisal district. So, which version of the story am I supposed to believe? And let's just take note of this. Today, as I'm making this video, it is 3:54 a.m., June 17th. That's right, it's the middle of the night because I don't have any time. I'm dealing with a lot of stuff right now. I wanted to make this video, but nobody has reached out to me and no action has been taken on this at all. At all. Nobody's reached out to me and no action has been taken on this at all.
Madam Chair.
Just a moment, I think Mr. Martinez would like to speak.
I have a quick question for you, Chandler, if you don't mind. And if I get out of line, please let me know. Just stop me real quick. So I know, you and I are both realtors, and anytime the complaint is filed with TREC, they, of course, they definitely look into it, and there's a hearing set. So just on the timeline-wise, are we under any kind of timeline with TDLR, or?
They have not seen it to be of a great concern.
Okay, that's all I need.
So and the investigator was sick or something. It's just been on the back burner for them. As far as I can tell, I'm not sure. The merits of the complaint, for anybody that's seen it, have not been a concern.
Right, so I know I've heard with TREC, if something happens like that, they'll start setting up timelines for it. So that's my question. Thank you.
Well, just so you'll also know, I still have not read the complaint, and I have not, other than fulfilling a public information request, I have not read or gone through the complaint.
I think he's had a little bit of time to think about what he said and realized there might have been a contradiction, and now he's doubling down on the better version of the story for his personal needs. But still doesn't add up. How do you look at the complaint, see how it's signed, but not read it? Aren't you going to be just a little curious? Aren't you going to be a little bit concerned that somebody is doing something wrong? Or whether it's your employee, especially if you see how it's signed, you're going to see how it's signed? See that it implicates the appraisal district? Surely you saw that it implicates the appraisal district, and you're not going to see what's in the complaint? I'm not buying it.
Again, I believe it was I believe Mr. Armstrong enjoys, as you said here, a First Amendment right to do what he wants. And so it was my understanding that he was doing this on his own accord through his right as a citizen to do what he felt was necessary.
If you look at the document that's
Hold on. You've not been asked a question. I think this is obviously a personnel matter, and it's obviously going to go to a executive session to address the issue of an employee utilizing county resources or the district resources for personal purpose, I think. And so I think at this point, I don't have any more questions, and I think we need to just say that we're going to go into executive session next meeting.
I think
Address
that's
that
what
issue.
I was
We have an issue,
suggesting.
we
I
understand it, we got it,
had
so now we
thought that this really was, that's where we're going to go.
Yeah,
That's
I
where
think
we
so.
need to go to have this discussion. And it's not about, what happens with person, there's a vision, but this
But there's a
involves
policy
this.
behind it, too.
There's a
There's
policy,
some policy issues behind
but
it,
this
too, that
does
we're gonna address.
include, as you heard from Mr. Crouch and all the information that we have now, that the appraisal district is involved in this.
I've got to give credit to Ms. Wildman. She's the only person in the room that has admitted or acknowledged the truth. Credit to you, Ms. Wildman.
And we don't know to what, but with our attorney, you will be here for our executive session. Yes, okay. Okay.
Probably.
Yeah, all right, so I think, Mr. Crouch, I know you have more to say, and,
one question.
okay, ask it.
Does the lack of action since November 22nd that he learned about this change add one note more level about Mr. Law's action concerning this issue? Does that concern the board at all?
That will be discussed in executive session under personnel matters.
I think it
That's-
is
that-
informative.
yes.
If I can say that, I think it is informative,
Yes.
but we don't know all the facts yet, Jim.
Yes.
For session.
We will discuss it then, and thank you.
So, I don't have any questions there, but I do want to encourage the positive relationship between our chief appraiser and Chandler. Chandler has been,
You just need one more?
Well, I just want to say, the only interaction that I've had with anybody in this whole matter, not one phone call, not one email or anything, was from the TDR investigators. Nobody said anything to me about that, and the email I sent to Mr. Law back on November 22nd. So I agree with your sentiment, and I will restrain myself.
yeah. So, but I think it would be useful if we get to the bottom of what happened and its legitimacy.
Yes,
before we have
that's what we're trying to
the
do.
executive
That's where we
session.
want to go with this.
Do we need a motion?
No, this is just a discussion, but it can come under future agenda items, and I will put that on myself, because I did initiate it, and I do think it's necessary. So I thank you all for, taking this and seeing it as an issue that could be hopefully settled there. Sir, do you have a question?
No, I have 2 minutes on this subject. I signed up for 2
Reserve
minutes
time.
on this subject.
He has to reserve time during his public comments.
Okay,
Is now the time?
I guess it is.
All right, thank you.
Wait, let us get the timer.
The chair makes the decision, Ms. Burgess.
Our attorney was just shaking his head, so I was just, we paid the guy a lot of money to.
Get a refund.
It is the chair.
Let me know when I have the floor, Ms. Burgess.
Pardon?
Let me know when I have the floor. Thank
I
you.
will let you know.
I,
The
the
time
No,
is
chair
started.
says, I was
Right.
just.
Go.
Thank you. So it's clear that the Tarrant Appraisal District has agency because it happened on company time, on the clock, using organizational resources. The deeper question on this specific agenda item, which is actually about depriving Mr. Crouch's First Amendment rights to free speech. So you're right, Mr. Pompa, there's a lot of things that you don't discuss here but I just watched a 15-minute discussion about the deprivation of this gentleman's First Amendment free speech rights and his ability to do business. My second point is, the organization at some level has known this since November. Mr. Law knew on some level something about this. His staff put it on the agenda. What kind of staff that we pay millions of dollars to would not provide the board members with the exact documents related to this very sensitive subject? You try to characterize this as a personnel matter when it is clearly a conspiracy at this point. You may not like that, but I'm going to give you a parallel example. The staff apparently does this all the time, and this is only the second day I've been here. On this agenda, on the back of this agenda, which was filed on June the 3rd, stamped by the county clerk, are the new rules for public comment. The public comment that you just voted on and adopted. So the staff preemptively put the wrong rules on this document. It is a shell game, and they constantly keep you uninformed, underinformed, omit documents or information. The gravity of the situation, Mr. Crouch should not have gotten to this level. The looks on your faces when you discovered that the complaint clearly was from Mr. Armstrong. The public and the media still don't know if Mr. Armstrong's even in the room right now. The fact is that if Mr. Armstrong is in the room and he didn't speak up, he should be terminated immediately. Separately, I believe that Mr. Law and a number of his staff had conversations about this prior to this board meeting today.
Thank you. And we'll move on. We're now down to the ARD Chairman's report.
Oh, sorry.